This is the Parenting in Perspective podcast. It's a Happy Families podcast. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. Thanks so much for being a part of these in-depth podcast discussions. This is episode 3 of a really engaging series that we've just started, where we dig deep with a wide variety of guests to unpack and discover what can make parenting incredible, as well as finding out how families flourish. Today's guest, Jessica Rowe, along with her husband, Peter Overton, the two of them combined, well, I think we could fairly comfortably say that they're Australian news media royalty. Jess has been honoured with a Member of the Order of Australia for her long broadcasting career, as well as her untiring work in mental health advocacy. Jess first appeared on our TV screens in the mid-1990s and over the years has co-hosted Network 10's First at 5 News, has read news on Weekend Sunrise, and has co-hosted Studio 10 and The Today Show. Aside from being one of the most recognisable faces on Aussie TV, Jessica Rowe is also a podcaster, a published author, a keynote speaker, and, more importantly, mum to 2 beautiful young ladies. And Jess is also a self-confessed crap housewife. So I began by asking Jess just why she sees herself this way.
I've got a beautiful husband. I've been married to my darling husband, Peter, for 17 years. We've got 2 gorgeous daughters, Allegra, who is 13, and Giselle, who's 11. And why I'm a proud crap housewife is, first and foremost, I think it's so important not to take ourselves too seriously. I've found laughter for me has been a wonderful way to get through difficult times, but also I think to laugh at myself. And what I have embraced, the older I get, the more comfortable I am in my skin, but the more comfortable I am with being open about my imperfection. I have struggles like all of us do. I am a crap housewife. I'm a terrible cook. Cooking does not interest me.
Now, I've got to interrupt you there, Jess, because I love the snort. I'm not an Instagram person at all. My team looks after my Instagram for me, but I do pop on there every now and again. And you're one person that I have followed for years on Instagram simply because of the relationship that we share. In fact, let me go on a quick tangent from this tangent. The first time that you and I met, I was sitting in the green room at Studio 10, Channel 10. We were getting ready to go on the TV, and you stepped into the room with wide eyes. You looked at me with this huge smile and said, "Excuse me, are you Dr. Justin Coulson?" Which was the funniest thing. Like, I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen? This is one of those Twilight Zone moments. I'm the one that's supposed to be saying, "Aren't you Jessica Rowe?" And you're looking at me going, because you've been reading some of my articles in the newspaper and you came in just gushing about how helpful my articles were, made my day. And so pretty much from then I followed you on Instagram because I was like, anybody who makes me feel that good, I've got to be involved in some kind of a relationship with, even if it's just on social media with your bajillion other fans. But what cracks me up about your social media feed is almost daily you take photos of the evening meal that you prepare. And what I love about this is, and please forgive me for being a little bit bold when I say this, but you're a celebrity, right? You've got celebrity status, whether you're comfortable with the term or not. You've got a huge following, and you could probably eat in fancy restaurants or at least get Uber Eats every night of the week for the rest of your life. You could never, ever cook. But instead, you're kind of like, no, well, I'm a housewife and I am cooking, but I'm hopeless at it, but I'm going to celebrate that anyway. And so your Instagram feed is full of baked beans on toast. And
it is. Baked beans on toast, mince, many different ways.
Every way.
We had spaghetti bolognese last night,
Yep.
So I'm probably going to reinvent that spag bowl to mince either shepherd's pie tonight. I'll make some mashed potato, put it on the top.
And call it a pie.
Or do something else with it. I'm not quite sure. Because I think mince is a highly underrated meat. You cannot overcook it.
Yeah.
You can't burn it. And also, kids will eat it.
Mm.
The number of times when I would attempt to do something different or follow a recipe or do something a bit fancy, my daughters would go, "I don't like it. I don't want to eat it." So that is very demoralising.
Have you tried the MasterChef craze? Like, have you stepped in and thought, no, tonight we're going to do something? You just...
No. Life is too short for me. I appreciate that for some people, they find that relaxing. But for me, I would rather put my fork in my eye than attempt some complicated meal. But you know what? What brings me joy, though, is my daughters love my spag bowl. And a number of years ago, my youngest daughter said to me, Mummy, this is so good. You should be on MasterChef.
Oh,
And that
yes.
was enough for me
What a
to
win.
get that endorsement from my girls. And that is why I suppose I do post my everyday life on Instagram, what I cook for my family, my messy house, my baskets of laundry, because it's a way of sort of saying we're all in this together. I mean, I know that's a terrible cliche, but it's sort of, I want to be honest about my life and what our real life looks like. And what I get from my Instagram is I've met this wonderful community of fellow crap housewives. We give each other, recipes. We give each other kind of virtual pats on the back and say, good on you, and all those sorts of things, which we now, I think, need more than ever, as opposed to feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm not good enough. Because, social media can be good, but it also can be negative in the sense that often people will look at other people's Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and sort of feel inadequate and think, oh no, my life doesn't look like that. What's wrong with me? So let's take the pressure off one another.
There's so many things that I want to pick up on there, and my brain can't possibly pull them all together, but a couple of things that I quickly want to highlight. First of all, your daughters love your spaghetti bolognese and think that it's good enough to be on MasterChef. Like that in and of itself sends I think a really profoundly important message to mums or even dads who are listening to this conversation. Like it's okay to be okay. And it's not that it's a celebration of mediocrity, because you've got extraordinary strengths and have had extraordinary successes in a range of places. But my sense is you're looking at what your strengths are and you're saying, well, I'm going to play to my strengths and I'm just going to manage the other stuff, and I'm going to be okay with just managing the other stuff and not expecting perfection in every single domain. That's what I'm hearing.
And you're so right, Justin. It was something that took a lot of time for me to get to a place where I could realise that I am enough, that I don't have to be perfect at everything in my life. Parenting is not a competition. Life isn't a competition. And I have come to realise that, yes, there are some things that I'm very good at and I will play to my strengths, but at the same time, I will embrace my imperfection and embrace my vulnerability and realise that that is okay. Part of that is with humour, laughing at myself, but also embracing the fact that I am a proud crap housewife. But that's okay, because no, I'm not good at that, but there's plenty of other things that I am good at and I can put my energy into.
Now, I want to pick up on something else that you've talked about, because you've alluded a couple of times already to some of the challenges that you've had in your life and the way they've refined and directed your thinking to where it is now. This need to laugh at life and be relaxed about things. You've got this profile, the fame, if you will, because of the extraordinary work that you've done over the years in journalism. And you've been very, very public as a personality. But just because everyone knows who you are and just because you've got the TV life, it doesn't mean that life's easy. And over the years, you've written and spoken a lot about some of the major challenges that life has thrown your way. I recall that you said when you went through IVF, you felt like you were a failure as a mum and a failure as a woman.
And absolutely, I felt in that way. And I think what is important to get across too is that, yes, I'm in the public eye, but each and every one of us has a story. And just because I'm in the public eye doesn't make my story either more profound or important or meaningful. It's just, I suppose, it gives me a chance to talk about it, because I'm a huge believer in there has to be something more meaningful that comes out of having a profile. Both of my parents taught me in different ways about the importance of giving back. So for me, I feel very passionately about sharing parts of my story, because it isn't just necessarily something that's happened to me. It's something that impacts on so many of us. So speaking about IVF is something that I do talk about, because our darling Allegra, who's now 13, we had her through IVF. And I was someone who in my early life, I was I was a perfectionist. I was ambitious with my career. I had ideas about how my life would turn out. And if I worked really hard and did all the right things, I'd tick all the right boxes and everything would fall into place. Part of that then included when I met my darling husband, we got married. Part of that then was, of course, I'm going to be a mum. And that's something that will come easily, that will be natural, that won't be a challenge. I had no idea that I would have problems becoming pregnant. And when I did realize that it wasn't going to come easily to us, I did feel like a failure, because there's almost that, I don't know why, but there's sometimes that innate part of us as women that you think, if I can't be a mother, there's something missing. There's something wrong with me. Part of being a woman for me very much is about, yes, I can be a mum and I will be a mother. And when I was confronted with that question mark over, you know what, maybe this won't happen for me, I did feel like a failure, because I thought, well, who am I now? I had defined myself through my early life, my sort of career. Then I was now a wife. And then I was thinking, now I'm going to be a mum. And I thought, well, if I can't be a mum, what does that mean for me as a woman? And I think that was a very difficult, confronting time for me. And then for anyone who goes through IVF, that is such a roller coaster of a time. And anyone who goes through it, I think, deserves a bravery medal, because nothing prepares you for this terrible but also wonderful journey of, am I going to be pregnant, or is this going to work? But nothing is guaranteed, and nothing prepares you for that. And how I used to try and manage my expectation, and that can be so crushing, but how I tried to manage that was, I always would be hopeful. And I think hope in our lives, regardless of what it might be that we're going through, hope is so important. And I would cling on to hope. And I think for all of us, when we are going through challenges, you need to cling on to something. And we were very lucky, because we were able to have a baby at the end of our IVF cycles. And I appreciate that for many other couples who go through it, that isn't going to happen. And that is such a heartbreaking, painful, terrible thing to go through. And especially when you feel like it's just you going through IVF, nothing prepares you for the sort of force of emotion that can take over you. And I think it's made me very mindful of other families, other couples, and the importance of being sensitive, because often people would sort of say what they thought was a nice or amusing thing to Peter and I about, oh, come on, you two, when are you going to hurry up and have a family, get on with it, all of those sorts of things. Exactly. And not realising that we were in fact going through IVF at the time and we were desperate to have a family. So I think it's really important to be sensitive in our conversations with those around us or those close to us, or even just in casual conversation with people that we mightn't know so well. We never know what other people are going through and the sorts of struggles that they are trying to deal with. And that's why for me, I've always been, and as I get older, more open about what I've been through, because I know when I hear other people's stories, it's helped me enormously feel less alone, because when you do go through something like IVF, you feel like you're the only one. Yes. And that no one else understands and no one else has been there. And in fact, there are plenty of people who do understand or are struggling. And I think perhaps if there are people listening who are going through this or considering it, just go gently on yourself. And if you can, hold on to that hope and don't give up.
I want to pick up on what you said about hope. It was a recurring theme as much as you were talking about how you felt like a failure and it was such a trying and invasive. I think without you saying it explicitly, underlying everything that you're saying is there's the physiological invasiveness of the IVF process, which is, I guess it's almost traumatizing, just physically to go through what you have to. But then the psychological invasiveness, this constant, it's that wave up and down again and again. Is it going to work this time? Is it going to work this time? What happens if it doesn't work this time? We're going through all of this, and what if? And this idea of hope that you've tapped into is something that I was really captured by a number of years ago when I was back at university and I was lecturing and doing the whole academic thing. Hope is different to optimism, because hope isn't just saying, I think good things are going to happen. I hope good things are going to happen. I believe in a positive future. Hope has three components that all need to be present so that we can be hopeful instead of hopeless. And I heard those three components in your story. The first is that you've got to have a goal. People without goals or direction or vision or something that they're working towards, something they're striving for, are not hopeful. They're hopeless. If there's no point getting up and trying to do whatever, then you're not going to be hopeful. You're going to be hopeless. So you've got that goal or that vision. The second thing that you need to have, though, is a pathway. And that's obviously what IVF was for you. It gave you hope because it was at least a pathway, whereas nothing else could even give you any hope at all. This was the path. And the third thing that you've got to have is an actual belief that you can walk down that path. And my experience working with families, working with parents, working with individuals, not even in a family context, just working with people who are feeling hopeless, is more often than not, they don't feel hopeless because they don't have a goal. Everybody wants something in life. Well, almost everybody. And if they've got a goal, most people can work out some kind of a pathway to that goal. It's very rare that somebody says, this is what I want, but it's hopeless. I can never get there. Most people are like, well, I could try this, or I could, there are options. And most people can usually see them. Where most people fall down is that self-belief that I can actually walk along the pathway to get to the goal. And what I hear you saying is, yeah, I had the goal and yeah, I had the pathway, but the real challenge was picking myself up day after day and walking down that path and getting onto the pathway that will take me where I want to be.
Exactly. And that sense of keeping going, and for us, the desire, the yearning, the longing to be parents was what kept me going. And I was willing to keep going for as long as I physically, but more importantly, emotionally could do it. So I was determined to keep going. And because I was able to do that, there's no way I could have done it on my own. Of course, I have my beautiful husband beside me. We were in it together. And I think that experience brought us so close to one another. And I appreciate, though, for some couples that isn't necessarily always the way. But we used to hold tight. It makes me emotional thinking about it, to each other during this time, because we could see how hard it was for each other, but we knew we had to hold tight. And also my family, they knew. So that was what kept us going, that we had this safety net of love around us that we knew were there for us, that would keep us going. And I'll never forget, and I get teary thinking about it, Justin, when I rang Peter, and he, at the time we were going through the IVF, he was working for 60 Minutes and he would be travelling up to 8 months of the year. So we would have to time the cycles, all of those sorts of things around his travel. And
no stress in that, Jess. No stress in that at all.
No, exactly.
I mean, just to add another level of challenge and burden to all this.
No layers of difficulty there. No. And he was in Italy. He was in Milan. And I remember he was waiting. He knew that this particular time that I'd be getting a call from the clinic about whether or not, when I'd had the embryo transfer, whether or not the embryo had sort of taken, so to speak, and was growing inside of me. And he knew that this particular day was approaching. So I rang Petey, and I think it was about 2 a.m. in Milan, and I said to him, I said, "You're going to be a dad." And the two of us just sobbed down the phone to each other because we couldn't believe that after all this time, finally our prayers had been answered. But still it was early days because, of course, with IVF, you have the tests that much sooner than you do if you're sort of trying naturally, so to speak. So this was only, I think it was 10 days after the embryo had been transferred. So there was still so much sort of waiting and hoping and praying to get to that 12-week mark. But thankfully, we called the embryo Milano because Petey was in Milan when I made this call, and thankfully, darling Milano, who turned into be Allegra, held on, and we were blessed with this beautiful, healthy baby. But it was such a time, because even to know that yes, that I was pregnant, there was still that holding our breath of, is it going to last? Will this pregnancy be viable? Will she keep growing? And we were blessed that Allegra did. And that is why, that hope, that tiny fingernail of hope that we clung onto early on, it did blossom, and we got this beautiful, healthy baby. And it is such a miracle, and I think it's just extraordinary.
I feel like I just want to sit and breathe in that phone call that you had with Pete while he was in Milan. I feel like I just want to savor that moment, hearing you talk about it and remembering. I mean, Kylie and I have been through that one 6 times. I wasn't in Italy when it happened, of course, but we've been through that. And I know how it felt for us, our excitement, our thrill. I genuinely don't think that I can comprehend what it must have been like for you to have that experience. I so appreciate you sharing that. You've always been very, very strong, explicitly so, about honouring your relationship with Peter. This is obviously a foundation for your family and a foundation for your life, your relationship with him. But I'm curious, with both of you working again in such a high profile and such a busy way, how have you been able to develop the relationship that you've developed? What have been the hallmarks, the traditions, the rituals, the things that you've done to sustain such a strong and honouring relationship together?
Like anything that matters in life, it takes work. And it's hard. There are times when I know I drive Petey up the wall and he drives me up the wall. But the thing is, at our core, and I knew this when I met Petey, he's a good, decent, wonderful man, and he's my life partner. And Petey, I know that he is always in my corner, the same way I am for him. And we're very different as people. Petey, we're like yin and yang, really. Petey's much more sensible and grounded, and I'm much sort of more, I suppose, eccentric, especially as I get older, more eccentric, silly, light, and I can drift off a bit. But he grounds me, whereas I lighten him. So we're a good partnership. We bring out the best in one another, and we're great friends, and we're a good team.
How do you make that happen, though? Like
Important.
I'm thinking of the couples who are listening to this right now, and they're thinking, well, we used to like each other. We used to get on lots. You used to be so much fun, and now you're just an obnoxious jerk. I'm sure that there's not a lot of that going on, but it does happen. How do we build that back into a relationship when it's snuffed out? In fact, maybe that's a nice segue into a question that I wanted to ask you. And again, it's a bit of a tough one. I mean, you've dealt with IVF, but you've been very explicit about describing what happened when you went through postnatal depression. I remember I read somewhere that you said asking for help is one of the bravest and best things you can ever do. You talked about how it saved you. First of all, going through postnatal depression, maybe you can talk to that just briefly and what you learned from that, but also how Peter was able to be a support for you and how you got that spark back into a relationship that was probably, the embers were probably a little low.
For sure. With the postnatal depression, it really was a time for me that I felt so ashamed that I had postnatal depression. I finally had this beautiful, healthy baby that I had longed to have, having gone through IVF, having said I would never be one of those women who would complain. Here I was at a time that was meant to be the happiest time of my life, that everyone around me was saying, isn't this the happiest time of your life? And it wasn't. It was the worst time of my life. I had never felt such despair and such darkness. And that is why I felt so ashamed, because I thought, what right do I have to feel this way?
Yeah,
Someone
all
who
of my dreams have come true.
has everything. That's right.
Yeah, everything's there.
This beautiful baby. I have this beautiful husband. I have this amazing extended family around me. Anyone looking at us from the outside would have gone, oh, what a lucky woman.
Yeah, rock star career.
I felt, so ashamed. And what struck me even more so during this time was I was someone who I'd grown up with a mum who has a mental illness, so I thought I understood mental illness. Mum and I had been very public about her mental illness and had done advocacy work for Beyond Blue. My mum has bipolar. So my message up until that point publicly had been there should be no shame in mental illness. We need to talk about it like any other physical illness.
And now you're feeling ashamed.
Here I was feeling so ashamed and feeling such stigma. And it made it so difficult for me to ask for help. I was able to pretend to everyone around me how happy I was. That was the worst thing I could have done because, of course, just because you hide something or think you will wish it away, depression is not going to go away.
Yeah. What you resist persists, right? Carl Jung, what you resist persists. Emotions don't vanish by being banished.
That's right. And they don't. And in fact, they get worse. And I got to a point where I really felt like I was going crazy, like I was losing my mind. And I was someone who'd always been very in control. I was always someone who'd been the cheerleader of our family, always very chirpy and upbeat. And suddenly here I was thinking, what is happening to me?
How did you get to the point where you could say, all right, I need to do something about this? And what did you do?
Well, for me, my rock bottom was when I just couldn't sleep. These endless nights of sleeplessness, these very scary, obsessive thoughts that were going through my mind. I thought, I cannot live with this any longer.
Were you thinking about suicide?
What am I going to do? I was heading that way, and I knew I had to talk to someone. And so I spoke to my mum because I knew she would understand. And so Mum was the first person I told. And Mum said to me, promise me you will talk to your doctor and promise me you will talk to Petey. So I made my mum those two promises.
So you still hadn't even talked to Pete. He must have known. He must have known that you weren't right.
No, he had no idea. No idea, because I was so good at pretending. And also he was still working for 60 Minutes, so he was travelling a lot. So it was easy to hide what I was feeling because he wasn't around. And then he'd come home and I'd put on the brave face. And I made my mum those promises. So I knew I had to tell Petey. And it was the hardest conversation I think I've ever had in my life, because I felt like I was letting him down and I was letting our brand new family down. And I thought, I have to say something. I have to. So I took a deep breath and I said, I'm not doing well. I said, I'm really frightened. I'm really frightened that I have postnatal depression. And Petey, being the beautiful man that he is, he took me into his arms and he said to me, it's going to be okay. And that is what I needed to hear that night. I didn't need to hear, as often well-meaning people might say, oh, don't be so ridiculous. Why would you be depressed? Oh, we've got such a great life. So-and-so's far worse off. What have you got to worry about? You'll be right. Pull your socks up. You're just imagining it. He didn't say any of that. He just reassured me. And that is what I needed to hear from him, those words. And it was extraordinary, Justin, because even just by verbalizing what had been going on inside me for so long, a little bit of weight started to come off my shoulders. And that was so freeing. And I think for all of us, we are so fearful sometimes about putting voice to what's inside of us, but it's so important that we do, because once we do, it loses some of its power and potency, and we need to share it. And that's why I still talk about my postnatal depression, even though it was so long ago and still so painful. It's so important that we do ask for help when we need it, because I would hate to think that there are other women suffering on their own, thinking that they have to deal with it themselves, or that they feel so ashamed, and why should they feel like that? Because by putting voice to my darkest fears, to asking for help, to then going to see my doctor the very next day after I told Petey, he organised for me to see my doctor, who then organised for me to see a psychiatrist the very next day after that. Because I then was able to put voice to all of that, I remember saying to my psychiatrist during that first appointment, and I sat down, and first thing she said to me was, "You can stop pretending now." And even more weight came off my shoulders. She was giving me permission to be open about what I was feeling. And then I told her everything. And I thought she'd say to me, "Right, you're off to hospital. We're taking your baby." But she said to me, "But that's normal." And I said, "Normal? I am a crazy lady, what I've just said to you." She said, "No, what you've told me is normal for someone who has postnatal depression." And again, some more weight came off my shoulders, and she was validating what I was feeling. And what I came to realize over time with both my psychiatrist, I was seeing her 3 times a week, then twice a week. I was taking medication. I was being gentler on myself, but I worked really hard. And what I came to realize was I wasn't a failure. I wasn't a bad mum. What I was feeling didn't mean that I didn't love my beautiful baby. I simply had an illness that I needed help to get through. And that first step of help was asking for it. And that can be so difficult because you do feel like a failure. But that's why asking for help is the bravest thing that someone can do, because it takes enormous courage to do that. But when someone asks for help, it is so important that we listen, that we take that seriously, and we make sure they get the help they need. Because thanks to me having that conversation with my mum, first of all, and then with Petey, and then with my doctor and psychiatrist, I was able to get back to being me, that I was able to focus on being a mum. I was able to focus on my beautiful baby rather than being lost to depression. We need to talk about it. We need to ask for help and get the support that you deserve and need, because the thing is, it is an illness. It needs to be treated properly and seriously, but you can get through it.
So grateful that you shared that, Jess. Now, Jess, the tables turned after, several years after all of these challenges that you went through, and a couple of years ago, Pete had some health challenges himself. There were some indications that I read, and I actually haven't talked to you about this, but there were some indications that there was concern that it was cancer. So what was it like for you to now have the opportunity to repay his endless, ongoing patience and support? Did you find that was easy or hard? And especially since you're showing up in the media every day and you're faking it again. You've got to be smiles and interviewing and doing the whole TV thing. What was that like to go through that with the tables turned? And how is Peter now? I presume he's doing fine.
Petey is wonderful. His health is fantastic. He did have some tests that early indications were that it might have been a certain type of cancer, but we were so lucky. We only had to wait 24 hours to get the next lot of results, which thankfully revealed no, it wasn't cancer. And that 24 hours, though, was, of course, like walking through quicksand. It was, your mind goes to all sorts of places. So I marveled at his strength during that time. And I think what's important to recognise, though, is that for us, it was a very short period of time that was that high stress, which I know for many other families, first of all, they don't get that good news, but also it's a much longer waiting period for test results.
We've talked about everything except parenting so far. So I've got I want to ask you two quick questions about parenting, and then I've got my 5 rapid fire questions that I wrap up every podcast with. You chose to leave the media, or at least your daily obligations to a television show, a little bit over a year ago now, or thereabouts. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can walk away from their daily work because of their personal circumstances. But why did you do it, and what has it meant for you?
It's such a good question, and I know how blessed I am that I had a choice, that I could walk away, and that was what made me realise that I needed to, that I had a choice, that I found myself in a situation where, yes, I loved my job on Studio 10. It's the best job I've ever had in television. But what I was finding was I was getting more and more tired. I was becoming more resentful. I wasn't liking the sort of person that I was becoming. I was becoming more and more impatient with our daughters and just thinking, why am I going through the motions of this when it isn't bringing me the same level of joy that it used to? Also, we were coming to a point, especially with my eldest daughter, where she's now a teenager, but she was almost a teenager. And I was seeing that she needed me to be more present. And I thought, I have to make this decision. First of all, because I'm able to make this decision, but I knew I needed to be a better parent. And for me to be a better parent, it was about being more present. It's the best decision I've ever made. And I'm a proud feminist. I support all the different choices that women make in our lives. And for me, making that choice to lean in for my family, to be present for my family, is the best thing I've ever done. I'm happier. And because I'm happier, I know my kids and my family are happier.
I love what you said at the beginning when you realised that that you were in that privileged position. I came across a quote just over the weekend by Lao Tzu, who said, one who knows enough is enough will always have enough.
Isn't that beautiful?
And then I was thinking about the gift that you've given your children in doing this. And I thought one thing that I'm always saying is, just like dollars are the currency of our economy, connection is the currency of our relationships. And it feels like, listening to you, your relationships are very much in the black now, not in the red at all.
Well, I'm trying. I mean, I think the thing is, Justin, that's why I love reading all of your columns and books and things. We're never there yet. And it is a constant sort of struggle. It's important that we do all we can to get it as right for us and for our family as we can. And I think every family is different.
Of course.
And the choices that we make are different, and we have to tap into what is right for us.
Jess, you're raising children, even though, you're raising children in the limelight. Birthday parties, everyone's excited to come to the celebrity's house. Do your kids get an easier or more difficult ride? Because
can I just say, that is so not the case.
Is that right? So there's this perception, you show up at the birthday party and everyone's like, oh, it's Jessica Rowe or it's Peter Overton. You don't get
most
that?
People, no. I mean, we're us first and foremost, and we've never and will never make a big deal of what we do.
You guys are pretty grounded. I'll give you that. I mean, every time I've talked to you, I've been like, yep, pretty grounded.
And we do a job. It's just people see what we do. And if anything, I think, I mean, I embarrass my kids, especially my eldest daughter. I have to walk 4 steps behind her or 4 steps in front of her because she doesn't want me to walk with her.
It even happens to you. That's so good.
Yeah, of course it does. And I say, but Allegra, isn't it a bit obvious I'm your mum? She's like, no, just stay behind me. Just don't talk to me. Don't look at me. So that's where we're at. And really, our daughters couldn't care less in the sense of we're just their mum and dad, and at times we're terribly embarrassing to them. And
just like every good parent should be.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap up this podcast, Jess, I always ask 5 rapid-fire questions, okay? So you've got about 10 seconds to answer each one, or maybe 15 or 20, because I'm sure you've got a good story or two for me. But everyone gets the same questions, and like I said, they're supposed to be relatively quick. So the first question is, if we asked your kids their favourite thing to do with you, what would they say?
Well, Giselle would say, I actually asked her this last night, she said trying new things. And also she likes to jump out of cupboards and give me a fright, because it doesn't matter how many times she does it, I always scream.
We've banned that in my house. I've got a daughter who loves to do that. I'm like, you're not allowed. It's horrible.
Did you think we'd be used to it? And no, she gets me every time.
Right.
I asked Allegra this and she just wrinkled her nose at me like, what? What do you mean? So, she would say probably nothing, but she does like to drive with me in the car, and she'll choose her music and we'll pump it up really loudly, and we'll drive around. So that's something that we have a laugh and enjoy doing together.
I can imagine you doing that. What's been your trickiest parenting moment?
Oh, every day. I think you're never there yet. I think that's the point, that there are all sorts of tricky things. And I, though, do enjoy my daughters the older they get. And I'm reveling in the people that they're becoming, and I love spending time with them and chatting to them. So I do enjoy it more and more the older they get.
Yeah, so that's a nice lead into my third question. If you could spend an hour with your children at any age at all, let's say tomorrow afternoon, 3:00, they're walking into your living room and they are that magical age, which age would you pick and why?
Oh, you know what? Absolutely where they are now, because I think I don't like to look back, and I also don't like to go too far into the future, because I think that can be a tricky path to tread, that more and more we need to be in the present, and we need to ground ourselves with what's happening now and be grateful for where we're at in our lives now. So I love exactly where they are now.
Awesome. No matter how good life has been, Jess, and no matter how glad you are to be in the moment, though, there must be something that you're looking forward to most as a mum. So that's question 4. What are you actually looking most forward to?
To lying in bed with no one actually calling out to me and going to the toilet in peace, being in the bathroom without anyone coming in. Just no one want me for like a day. Imagine that, a day of just peace. That would be heaven.
All right, last question. If you could go back to Jessica Rowe as a young mum, having one of those tough moments with no experience of this parenting thing at all, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say you are enough. You are a good mum. You've got this. You are going to get more sleep one day.
Yes, one day.
And you are good enough.
You know, Jess, I'm so grateful for that piece of advice. I've never done this before, but I want to share something with you out of one of my books. When I wrote the book, 10 Things Every Parent Needs to Know, I'm just going to read 3 paragraphs because it underscores or re-emphasizes what you've just said. And I hope that you don't mind being my one-person audience as I read these 3 paragraphs. Well, I'll just read it. Is that okay?
Oh, yes. Okay. You'll probably make me cry.
I hope so. Here we go. In the novel 93, French writer Victor Hugo wrote, "She broke the bread into 2 fragments and gave them to her children, who ate with eagerness. She hath kept none for herself," grumbled the sergeant. "Because she's not hungry," said a soldier. "No," said the sergeant, "because she is a mother." It is almost impossible to put into words the depth of love that we feel as parents towards our children. As Cordelia explains in Shakespeare's King Lear when speaking of her love for her parent, "My love's richer than my tongue. I cannot heave my heart into my mouth." If you feel that way toward your children, then you are enough. The endless laundry, the thankless tasks related to maintaining your home, the challenges children provide, each compounds to make us feel like it might all be too much. And Instagram makes it look like everyone else is doing it so well. They get their pre-baby body back in 5 weeks, their meals all look like they've come from a hatted restaurant kitchen, and they seem to have so much more time to spend doing meaningful activities with their children. The surest way to feel poorly about your parenting is to compare yourself with others, especially when you mostly only get to see their highlights reel. But parenting is as much about the good times on Instagram as it is about those moments you would never want anyone to see. It's about how we respond to the runny noses, the fussy eating, the wet beds, the soiled underwear, or the puddle on the carpet that provides evidence that the toilet training still has a way to go. It's about how we respond to the complaints that my legs are sore and I can't walk on tired mornings, the lost school jumpers, and the never-ending sibling challenges that confront every parent of more than one child. Our responses to those micro moments that occur endlessly, day in and day out, set the foundation for our children's lives. As we respond with patience, kindness, understanding, compassion, and a desire to help rather than hurt, we're doing enough. We're doing all that's required. We're growing, we're loving, and we are enough as a parent. We're doing work that will never be seen by anyone beyond our family. But the value of that foundation we lay will last for generations.
Oh, Justin, see, you've made me cry. It's so beautiful. But you're so right. And that's why the books, the articles, what you do is so important, because we need that reassurance. We need that information. We need that connection and community, I think, to know that, yes, we are all enough. We are good enough. We're doing our very best.
I think
it's
what's interesting about that is pretty much everything that I've written in the book you talked about in this conversation. And it's been a wonderful conversation, Jess. It's been delightful. It's been affirming. It's been thought-provoking. And I'm sure for many people who are listening to this, it's been life-giving. So thank you so very much for your generosity.
Oh, Justin, thank you. You know how much I love you and how much I love talking to you, and I just think you're amazing. So thank you for having me. It's been a very, very special conversation.
Wow, what an honest, vulnerable, and maybe even raw conversation with Jessica Rowe. I hope you've gained some insight into the life of Jess as a result of this Parenting in Perspective podcast. If you'd like some further reading, it's well worth checking out Jess's book, The Best of Times, The Worst of Times, which documents Jess and her mother's journey with bipolar disorder. There's also Love, Wisdom, Motherhood. Her memoir is This My Beautiful Life? And her latest, Diary of a Crap Housewife. Now, one more important thing, if there's anything that's been discussed on this podcast that raises issues for you, please reach out to an organisation like Lifeline, Headspace Australia, Beyond Blue, who Jessica is an ambassador for as well. And thanks again for being part of the Parenting in Perspective podcast on the Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast feed. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. It's been great to have you with me. Just before I run, I want to tell you about a couple of quick things. So very grateful for the reviews that come through via the Apple Podcasts app. If you have enjoyed the podcast, can you go there and give me a 5-star review? Don't worry, if you didn't enjoy it, I don't need to know. Don't dive in there and give me one of those 1-star reviews. They're no good. But Schmuff left a review just recently who said, "Your Happy Families podcast is my lifeline. Your 3 E's and 5 H's, such great insight on how to manage anxiety and manage life with kids. The podcast is an easy, doable listen with a short snippet of advice. I love listening to it when I go for walks and clean the house. It's my little taste of therapy at home. I've spread the words to friends. Thank you." Well, Schmuff, thank you for your 5-star review. It's just wonderful to hear from you and to know that you enjoyed it. And by the way, please do tell your friends about the podcast. This is how we get the word out and how we get to help loads of people to make their families happier. The next Parenting in Perspective podcast is just a week away. Please join me, Dr. Justin Coulson, as I talk with Dr. Justin Patchen, who has a PhD in criminal justice. We're going to be discussing cyberbullying and working with youth and technology.
We learned right then and there that there was a story that these kids wanted to tell. They didn't feel comfortable telling their parents about it because they didn't know anything about technology, so they were just kind of holding on to this. And so we've been studying it ever since.
That's Justin Patchen, my next guest on the Parenting in Perspective podcast, a Happy Families podcast. For more information, visit happyfamilies.com.au.